rare situation is allowing you to buy some ETF stocks for 50% off. Learn more at crushthestreet.com/profit2017.
Hello, everyone, and welcome in to crushthestreet.com. I got a returning guest today. His name's Michael Rivero of whatreallyhappened.com. And that's the type of stuff that he talks about. He really gets into the details, stuff you don't hear on MSM. And we've explored 9/11 on this show before, Hilary Clinton, Trump, and we're going to do a little more of that today. Mike, without any further ado, thanks for coming on the show with me.
Well, thank you for having me again.
Mike, the left seems very unhinged when it comes to Donald Trump Jr. response. In an email with a Russian lawyer, he said, "I love it," over the prospect of getting some dirt on Hillary Clinton from this Russian lawyer. In 2016, Donald Trump Jr. went on Fox News Hannity on July 11th and said, "In retrospect, I probably would have done things a little differently." And is it fair, I guess, to attack Donald Trump Jr. for this? And is the left just simply striking while the iron is hot? Would the right be doing the same thing, I should say?
Well, everybody does opposition research during a campaign, and if somebody calls up and says, "I've got information that's going to help you," you're probably going to take that meeting. And yes, everybody does it. And the liberal Democrats are trying to make a big deal out of this as part of their Get Donald Trump campaign. But you need to understand the backstory of what's going on, which is that this whole Russia stole the election for Donald Trump idea was cooked up in the first 24 hours after Hillary realized she had lost the election to Donald Trump. And they came up with this idea of saying this was all Russia's fault. And apparently they actually had this fantasy that the American people were going to drag Donald Trump out of the White House and shove Hillary into it, which obviously has not happened all this time. And they're still out there pushing this idea. As far as this meeting goes, there really wasn't all that much information that was shared about Hillary that was not already all over the internet and the independent media. Primarily, they were talking about the Magnitsky Act and various other aspects of law in the United States and Russia. And apparently, all the attention centers on this Russian lawyer, Natalia Veselnitskaya, and the idea that she's from Russia and she's dealing with Russia. But it's turning out now that her Russian office appears to be a shell. There's no phone. There's no website. There doesn't seem to be anybody there at all. Meanwhile, there's been a leak of more State Department emails showing that she actually has very close ties to the U.S. State Department and is much more a U.S. intelligence asset than anything to do with Russia. And now she has gone public saying that she herself was set up and lured into this meeting by Magnitsky Act lobbyist Bill Browder. And she's now saying that she is in fear for her own life and that of her family because it appears they were all being used to try and manufacture a compromising meeting that could be used to go after Donald Trump by the Hillary camp.
Wow. So what you're saying is basically this was completely manufactured. Yes. And Donald Trump Jr. was set up. Does it say a lot that he was forthright in the emails showing what it was that he discussed? Is there any credibility that is lent to him for actually doing this? Or is he just trying to play the cards he's dealt and skate by?
Well, obviously, there's a lot of political damage control to be considered, and one of my tremendous concerns about Donald Trump himself and his family coming into the White House is he's very smart in business. He comes from the world of business, but it's colored his perceptions. He expects people to behave a certain way based on his experience in the world of business. And coming into the White House, he is in many ways, or has been, as dangerously naive as Jimmy Carter, who was just not prepared for the way Washington, D.C. really works. Trump appears to be picking up on that right now. But the good news is polls are showing that this whole Russia-Trump collusion story is losing traction. Right now, the number of Americans who believe that there's some issue there is down half from what it was just last April, and most people are just totally burned out on it because the corporate media has been saying Trump, Russia, Trump, Russia, Trump, Russia, so much they're not really covering anything else, and people are starting to really turn them off. More and more people are saying there is a lot more evidence regarding the abuses of the Clinton Foundation, especially down in Haiti, the Uranium One deal, the fact that Russia gave Podesta money, and if the corporate media's attitude is we're not interested in anything to do with Hillary and the Democrats, and neither should you be, we're all going to get Donald Trump.
So many people seem to be exhausted with the right or people anti-Hillary or anti the left. I don't know how you want to put that. Continuing to bring up Hilary Clinton. But the fact is, it's the clearest double standard that we've seen, the most recent clearest double standard that we've seen. And where was the outrage when Bill Clinton received the $500,000 for, giving a speech in Russia, and then their approval of handing 1/5 of the U.S. uranium to Russia, which shortly after they received $2.3 million from the Russian-controlled company. And of course, you mentioned John Podesta. So what is the double standard? Is there getting through and any, I guess, level-headed, any sort of anything to look forward to potentially have some optimism for us as American people?
Well, we're not going to get through the bias of the corporate media. They are paid to say what they are saying, but we are getting around them because more and more people are abandoning corporate media and they're turning to the independent media, such as your program, in order to find out what's really going on. People instinctively want to know that they're being told the truth, and when they discover that a corporate media outlet or a government is lying to them, they're going to turn away and look for other sources. And we're certainly seeing that in the viewership and readership numbers of the corporate media. Versus the growing audience for the independent media. We've reached a point right now where some of these corporate media outlets have been caught falsifying their viewership and readership numbers, faking clicks on their own website to try and look like they're still relevant and in control of the discussion, which, by the way, is defrauding their own advertisers. But more Americans are starting to realize that the great deal of truth that lay behind Mika Brzezinski's statement that she made on MSNBC last February, that the job of the corporate media is to control what the American people are thinking. And the American people are very resistant to the idea of being told what to think. And that's another reason why the corporate media is in such trouble. And they're in an absolute panic. They don't know what to do about the independent media. There's too many of us to be brought under any kind of a control. And of course, that's what a diversity of opinion was supposed to prevent in the first place.
So I've been watching this federal government documentary of the inner workings that goes on between congressmen, senators on Netflix. Maybe you've heard of it, House of Cards. And one thing I've noticed is how everyone is so intertwined. Of course,
yes.
Joking. And everyone is patting each other on the back. I do something for your district, you do something for me. And I guess, is it impossible? My question is it impossible for someone such as Ron Paul or Trump, for this matter, to really attempt to disrupt what is going on with the dealings in Washington, D.C.?
Yeah, unfortunately, the federal government, when it grabbed all of the authority and power to itself following the Civil War, it created basically a one-stop shopping center for all the corrupting influences in our society. And over time, it's just within the Beltway, it's accepted. They're there to serve their backers. They're there to serve particular agendas. And especially with the growing evidence of massive election fraud last year, the idea is the American people are no longer allowed to have a say in the running of the country. And that's another reason why Trump's victory was such a shock to them, because Trump overcame not only the incredible media bias against him, he overcame a huge amount of election fraud that they're still trying to keep under wraps. To try and reassure the American people that we have some semblance of an honest government. But it has become this incredible intertwined pool of corruption, the swamp, if you want. And unfortunately, it is impossible for a single individual like a Ron Paul or a Donald Trump to undo it, because everybody who's there is there looking after their own wallets, their own stock portfolios. Ultimately, though, I'm in agreement with a lot of other observers around the world that the federal government of the United States of America is clearly heading toward a Soviet Union-style collapse. And so our focus really needs to be on what kind of a new nation should we be planning to create in this land when the opportunity presents itself. And the obvious answer is we go back to that constitutional model, the first 13 amendments, and we add some ironclad stuff in there like no more private central banking, because it is that private central bank that has impoverished our nation and brought us to this very low standard of living. And the irony is that it's exactly this style of banking that we fought the original American Revolution to break free of, only to be sold back into that slavery by a corrupted Congress and a corrupted president a little over 100 years ago.
So is it fair to say that because of human nature, all governments are corruptible? Even if we were to have some idealistic reset and some new starting points like you're talking about, is it fair to say that in 100, 200 years, because of human nature, greed, self-interest, self-motivations, whatever you want to call it, that it's corruptible over time no matter what?
Well, it's very interesting, because when Thomas Jefferson started laying out the plan for the U.S. government, it was literally built around this idea that all people are corruptible. And so they wanted to set up a governmental system that prevented power from aggregating into just a few hands. And so authority was spread out over the country. The states were sovereign and independent. The federal government existed only to arbitrate between the states, but had no authority within them. They broke the government into 3 branches to keep watch on each other, and there were serious limits on the power and authority of all parties involved in that recognition that over time power will corrupt. And even Thomas Jefferson himself wrote in his letters that he did not expect the government that he designed to last more than 100 years before it would have to be torn down by the people and replaced with something better. So obviously we've exceeded Jefferson's expectation for life expectancy for the government, until you consider that what we have today has traveled so far away from that original model of a true republic with a democratically elected government.
Yeah, I guess the current system is like the owner of the horse and buggy companies when cars were coming around. We assume that things just kind of transfer over to what things need to be and where things are trending. But of course, in reality, the owner of the horse and buggy company is going to go down kicking and screaming for as long as possible. They're not going to just let it happen on his watch, because he's not prepared for what's coming next, right?
Well, basically what happens whenever you have an established source of revenue flow, the people who benefit from that flow will protect it at all costs. And maybe the horse and buggy guy could simply transition his company into the new automobile. But when you're talking about the rigging of Wall Street to keep the money junkies happy, they don't want to let the system change at all, because they're benefiting from it. When you look at the massive amount of election fraud in this country and you wonder why is nothing being done, you have to come to the conclusion that a large number of politicians in Congress are there because of election fraud, and that's why they don't want to tinker with that system. And so rather than having a government that is really forward-looking and progressive, it's actually just this shrill defender of the status quo as it is right now, from which they benefit.
Well, so in terms of what we're seeing right now with President Donald Trump, the current administration, is this politics as usual, or is this something that is different? Are we seeing something different now than we saw in the Obama administration and the George Bush administration, Clinton? Is what we're seeing now something that the American people should just have expected?
Well, at some point, yes, but what is really different, there's always political infighting. There's always different groups vying for control. I mean, we saw that all the way back at the John F. Kennedy assassination. But normally such infighting is hidden from the general public in order to keep the general public calm and reassured that government is functioning smoothly. Now, all of a sudden, since Trump's election victory, the American people are seeing that our government is badly factionalized. It's dysfunctional. It can't really accomplish anything. We're seeing the members of Congress are putting party ideology and advantage over what is good for the American people. And the American people are just fed up and disgusted with it. Trust and confidence in the U.S. government and the corporate media, for that matter, is at an all-time record low. And we're seeing more and more people saying they want both the Republicans and the Democrats to go away and maybe think about a new way of running this country.
Okay, so I guess the big thing is what happens if the Republicans continue to screw Trump and not allow him to get anywhere with his platform plans that he ran on, the wall, healthcare reform, tax policies, all things that the American people are expecting?
Well, if the Republicans go on obstructing Donald Trump, they only increase the possibility that the Democrats will take control of Congress in next year's midterm elections. And that is something Hilary Clinton is now involving herself in. She's trying to take over the leadership of the Democratic Party. Even though a lot of the old guard Democrats just wish she would fade away because she's become a serious liability for the Democrats. In fact, she's become an albatross around their neck. But we're seeing all these individuals and small groups vying for power. And again, the impression that it's giving the American people is the government is fracturing and fragmenting. And that is something that we also saw in the Soviet Union in the months before it collapsed.
Wow. Yeah, and Hillary Clinton doesn't seem to want to go anywhere. She seems to continue to hang around. And you mentioned being a major liability to the Democratic Party. Do you see her being a potential candidate here for 2020, the 2020 election against Donald Trump?
Well, believe it or not, they're already running polls to see if she could be viable, and the numbers are very bad, something like 4%. But it does indicate that, yes, she's seriously thinking about finding a way to come on back and basically put the deep state lock back on the government. See, the reason this has all been so upsetting to them is that Donald Trump really is an outsider, and they can control him, they can corral him, but he's not reliable. He's not part of that inner narcocracy that has dominated American politics for the last 30, 40 years. And that's why they're really scared, because all of these people have committed crimes for which, under a truly just system, they would go away to prison for the rest of their lives, and they're scared at some point there could actually be an opening through which prosecutions could start. Now, all of these presidents, whether it's Bush or Clinton, have done what they've done in the sure and certain knowledge that they have control over who will succeed them in the White House and that their successor will guarantee to keep all the cover-ups in place. And to give you a historical precedent for that, again, we're going to go back to Richard Nixon, who was playing a lot of dirty games, although, I mean, compared to Hillary Clinton, Richard Nixon was a Boy Scout. But he basically maneuvered to get Spiro Agnew out of the vice presidency and Gerald Ford in before he resigned, because a lot of that whole Watergate issue does go back to the John F. Kennedy assassination. And Gerald Ford had been on the Warren Commission, and they could count on Gerald Ford to just shut down all the investigations and make all of the really bad secrets go away. Because in politics, there are two classes of secrets. There are the little secrets that become the fodder during campaign season, like Anthony Weiner and his cell phone, which is a scandal, but it doesn't affect the government as a whole. Then you have the great secrets, the truth behind the Kennedy assassination, the truth behind 9/11, the truth about there not being nuclear weapons in Iraq. These are secrets that are so bad they could bring the entire government down, and everybody wants to keep those under wraps. Now, right now, I'm in agreement with Sean Hannity. The Hillary email case ought to be reopened, because there's a question behind all of that that needs to be asked. And the precedent for all of this is 1994, when Bill Clinton, using his authority as president, authorized the transfer of sensitive military technology to China. At the same time, Chinese money was pouring into his re-election campaign. And it was called the Chinagate scandal. And it should have been investigated, but it was blocked at that point. And so the big question about Hillary's private email server and why she needed a private email server was she playing the same game? Was she selling U.S. secrets to foreign interests using her weak email server to deliver the goods and that charitable foundation to collect and launder the payments? Because if you look at how much foreign money poured into that foundation and how little of it was actually spent on charity, it's a reasonable question to ask. If a serving Secretary of State betrayed her country in the quest for money with which to run for president.
Wow. Well, you mentioned a new system, a breakdown of the current system, the bubble bursting, whatever you want to call it, the central bank implosion, and a new system to come around. And what are your thoughts on that? I guess I want to conclude here. What are your thoughts on how that could play out and what could happen? To me, it seems like even if we do have a major collapse, just like, maybe to a larger degree than we saw in the 2008 financial crisis, the elites will take control of it, package it up, and continue the game. I find it very hard to imagine that the most powerful people in the world, the central bankers, are just going to completely go away.
No, they won't. But what they can't stop is a transition of a nation to an entirely new government. And yes, we're talking about an economic crash probably by the end of the year. But I'm talking about a Soviet Union-style collapse of the federal government itself. And when they formed the new Russian republics, the first thing they did was they kicked all those ultra-rich oligarchs out of Russia. They took direct control of their central bank. And life in the Russian republics is a lot better than it was under the old Soviet government. And I foresee the same thing happening here in the United States of America, where all those people who call themselves our elites now will be basically considered undesirable in this country, and they'll be asked to leave. The same thing that Putin did with all of the hardliners left over from the Soviet Union. And I really do think that's where we're going. And there's going to be probably 3 to 4 months of very difficult times that we're going to have to get through while the new government is being put together. And now's the time to start networking with your neighbors, your friends, your community, to build up that sense of local community so you can help each other out going through these next few rough months following that Soviet-style collapse.
Mm-hmm. Well, Michael Rivero, thanks for coming on the show with me today. Reporting from the beautiful state of Hawaii. If people want to learn more about what you're doing and listen to your show and go to the things that you're offering, where would they go and what would they find?
Well, my website is called whatreallyhappened.com, and I also do a daily 3-hour talk radio show at the Republic Broadcasting Network from 3 p.m. to 6 p.m. Central United States time, and there are links from my website to the broadcast, or you can go to republicbroadcasting.org and listen to the show directly from there.
Well, you're the man, Michael. Thanks for coming on the show with me today.
Thank you for having me again.